going on, guys? This is John Kim, and today we're going to do a walkthrough on this template code base that has been given to us. So as you can see, we have four directories: a configuration directory, a models directory, a public directory, and a routes directory. Now we're going to expand upon the contents of these directories in a little bit, but for now we want to take a look at these two files inside of the root directory. Well, technically they're under develop directory, but usually you would see this in the root. So looking first at the package.json, this is more or less going to be the file that initializes the application once the infrastructure instance has been set up and running, right? So, of course, we have a name, version, description. We specify the server JavaScript file, that will be running the back end, or more or less, it's more or less a shot caller at the back end, so to speak. And we have a couple of scripts, that we'd like to run. For instance, for start, we want to, use the Node framework to start the server.js, and of course we have Node monitor in order to keep an eye out on the server.js. If it crashes, we can restart it. If there's any changes to it, so on and so forth. Dependencies. We got a couple of dependencies. We will see how each of these dependencies are utilized once we do a deeper dive into the actual contents of the directories themselves. But you can see right off the bat that we're using bcrypt in order to handle our hashes and scripts, along with passport to handle user authentication and user data, SQLize, so that we can go ahead and send sets of SQL queries into our MySQL database whenever we're writing into the database. And of course we want to do it asynchronously, so we set up express session, or maybe that was passport. Maybe that was passport that asynchronously does the database sync and whenever something comes up, but I guess we'll see. So with that being said, let's take a look at the server JavaScript file. So most of the beginning is going to be the quote-unquote boilerplate code. So our variable declarations are going to be more or less pretty similar to the dependencies that we've listed on our package, right? So we have express, we have passport. For port, we're either specifying 8080 strictly, or it's going to go ahead and use the port that's been provided by the environment, which is common, with automatically orchestrated or deployed instances. For DB, we're going to require models. Again, this is one of the directories that we're going to take a deep dive into. Just to give you a little preface, it has the classes, or more or less the JavaScript files that exports classes for the user, most specifically. And going to express how are we going to handle the middleware. There's we're going to we require an app server or a web server in order to host this application on our server and send it to the client. So of course we use app for express, URL encoded, JSON. We definitely want to send JSON packages back and forth between some of these processes. And app.useExpress.static public. Now this is another one of the directories that we saw earlier, and this directory actually contains all of the client-side assets. So everything that the client requires on their local browser is going to be found in the public directory, so that's why we want to go ahead and send the contents of this directory whenever we're hosting this application. Of course, sessions. This is going to be used in order to ensure that whenever we have a user who's logged in or signed up and then logged in, then we want to ensure that they're signed in for the entire duration of their use, and ensure that it also logs off automatically, whatnot, and handles the authentication for that matter. And routes, as you can see, we have two JavaScript files for routes. We have the HTML routes and we have the API routes. And finally, before we initialize our application, which is done with this set of commands over here, you see we have db and sequelize and then sync. So going back, db require models. So we take the user model and then we go ahead and sequelize it. Sequelize as in we take sets of SQL queries in this case. We'll see it more in depth and when we do a deeper dive. And then we synchronize with the database itself before we go ahead and execute the function. And as we saw with session, we also have nodemon, watch nodemon server.js, so that whenever something needs to be updated or resynced, then it will go ahead and restart the server whenever it detects those changes. So let's take a quick look at the expanded views of the configuration, models, public, and routes directory. So starting from the bottom and going up, in the routes directory we have API routes and we have HTML routes. Now, looking first at the HTML route, so we can sort of guess that this JavaScript file is going to handle the communication between the HTML files. More or less, if you want to navigate between pages, for instance, login, sign up, member, on first instinct, you're going to say that this HTML route is going to handle all this communication, and perhaps even the form submissions and packaging that JSON data and sending it to a JavaScript file or its correlating JavaScript file and processing it to be synced to the database, which is what the API routes JavaScript file is more or less handling, right? Because we're egressing and we're ingressing data into the models from the database itself. Of course, we need to handle that via an API route, and we'll see how that is done specifically in the actual file itself. Now, as I mentioned, this user data may be packaged in JSON, routed with HTML routes, processed and their respective JavaScript files, and then perhaps loaded into an exported class. This exported class user for authentication. It will take the data that's been processed from a user logging in or a user signing up, and then go ahead and sequelize it before it gets sent off into the database. Again, calling the API route in order to handle this egress process. Now, of course, we have a gatekeeper, the middleware. our configuration. We have the passport.js to config.js, and we can easily see that for each step, we need to ensure that that the data or the user input and login, for instance, matches what is already inside of the database from members who have signed up. So this is where the middleware comes into play, and of course, this is working in conjunction with the API route, so that it can communicate with the database during each one of these steps in order to ensure maximum security or authentication. Perhaps the authentication doesn't apply to every step, but it at least will apply to the initial step of logging in. And so let's take a deep dive into a couple of these files. So beginning with the index.javascript. Now you can see we have our variable declarations. We require a couple of dependencies such as file system, path, sequelize. Of course, we have base name, environment. We want to process the actual environment name. Configuration. Now this is calling back to the configuration directory right here, which we will go to in a minute to look at the contents of. And with the database variable over here, which I will figure out as we go. But beginning with this first if statement, we can see that, hey, if we're inside of environment, and this virtual environment has been more or less set up for us through some type of orchestration or Terraform, then we'll go ahead and process this environment and use the configuration that has been more or less defined for us. Else, we'll go ahead and go back to the configuration directory and then use the configuration that has been specified in the config file. Now going to the file system, it looks like what we need to do is we need to synchronously read the directory name and filter so it's looking like it's going to resolve the directory name and look for JavaScript files and go ahead and read them for us. And it's saying that for each of the files that it's found in the directory that it resolved, go ahead and sequelize. Go ahead and sequelize, or use the sequelize class that we had defined previously based on the configuration, and begin importing these files that have that may or may not exist based on the models, which is right here. So we have index and we have users. So basically, this is saying, hey, we have a model for index, we have a model for user, and we're going to, once we construct a sequelize injector based on the user model, then we'll go ahead and sequelize the data and send it off. Since I accidentally clicked on it, I might as well go through the user model itself. And as I mentioned before, we want to ensure that we encrypt sensitive data such as the password. So it looks like at this stage, at the model stage, this is where we begin encrypting the actual data itself. Right here, bcrypt comparison password, this password. Now, as I mentioned, for sequelize, we need to set up a set of SQL injections, right? And so this is done by these key value pairs. So email, we all understand, is going to be a string, and the metadata associated with the email is, can it be null? No. Is it unique? Yes, it has to be unique. And we'll go ahead and validate it real quick to make sure that it is an email, which I'm assuming does it have an ampersand? Does it have a domain? Those fundamental properties of an email is more or less covered with this validation statement. And once so we go ahead and prototype this class, and we return a salted and hashed version of the password, this password. So the string has the salt attached to it, whatever that salt may be, and then the combination of that string plus the salt is then encrypted into that hash. And then that is what is going to be sent out of the models and into our database. And of course, user add hook. Oh, it looks like, well, actually, it looks like this is where the salt is being added. So this is basically setting up the class to begin hashing a salted password. So this is where the salt is being added, and then this is where all the encryption hashing is going on, so that we have that long string of gibberish, and then we go ahead and return the user. Now let's go to the configuration file, right? So config.json. We have our database name, our host name, the dialect, all that. So if this isn't defined by the environment, then it will defer to these configuration sets. And the way the way the authentication is logically it's more or less logically validated would be through a nice little package called Passport. So we're requiring the models. It's a good thing that I accidentally clicked on it, because now that we have gone through the actual user class or prototype, then we can see how the email and password data is more or less being processed through Passport. So passport.use local strategy. So we're going to go ahead and lay a blueprint for authentication. So we're going to connect to the database, and we're going to use the SQLi state and find one, and we're going to look to see if there exists an email that matches the email that has been sent by the user model. And once that is validated, then we'll check, hey, if there's no user, then we're going to say, you know what, incorrect email, sorry. But if there is a user and the password is wrong, then we'll tell you, hey, incorrect password. Usually we'll say incorrect email or password, incorrect email or password, to sort of make the to make it ambiguous, right? And if it passes, otherwise, if it passes, then we go ahead and return the actual user who has been found in the database. Now, once that happens, we'll go and close this function. Once that happens, we'll Looks like we'll serialize the user. So this is all boilerplate. So we're using a callback function, and we're using the user information, and we're deserializing it. So object, and we're exporting it as passport. Going on the middleware. Now this is where once a user has been found inside of the database and it passes this function, then we go ahead and export the user. Then we want to ensure that the express session is holding on to the user data, and so right here and is authenticated. So once passport authenticates you, then we'll go ahead and send you to the next, looks like the next route. Otherwise, it's going to overwrite the routes that had been specified and just redirect you straight to the route. So speaking of routes, let's take a look at what that looks like. So we'll begin with API routes because that's going to be the most pertinent to to what we had just covered. So beginning with database with DB require models. We went over this in the beginning. The user email and password is what we want to focus on for that particular model that's been exported out of there, which is passed through to the passport module. And then now it looks like we're exporting this particular function that has all the route tables in there. So once passport.authentication local function. So with our local strategy, if the user has a valid login credential, send it to the members page. Otherwise, the user will be sent an error. So this right here, app.post, it looks like once the login information has once the login form has been submitted and resolved, then we'll go ahead and send that resolution and post it as a request from the user. Now this request can be used by Passport for authentication purposes, or well, first it will be ingested by the database model to be set up in the user class, and then this will be sent out to Passport for authentication, which will sync back and forth with the database itself in order to more or less figure out whether or not this user is authenticated, right? Versus if you were to sign up, okay, so now we need to create a user. So as you can see, we have an email, we have a password, exactly those two parameters that is specified in the user model. And then once that user is created and synced with the database, it'll redirect you to the login. And of course, we want to catch any sort of errors that may occur. Of course, we want to handle login out. So what we have here is we have a CRUD request for logout, and then that will redirect you to the home page. And then finally, we have a get, an app.get. So if you want to get the user data, we need to, first of all, we need to ensure that the user is logged in. So, if there does not exist a user class that has been exported, and authenticate it by passport, then we'll go ahead and send this back, right? Else, what we'll do is, because this user exists, has been logged in, authenticated, now we can go ahead and, send the email and, the ID data. And finally, HTML routes. So, as you can see, as I mentioned, once, the user data has been authenticated, has gone through the hoops, then now we have access to the members page. So because we have been able, so in this app.get login, we can see that, this particular string of commands will log a user in and then send them to the members page if they're authenticated. If not, then we'll go ahead and send them back to the login page again, right? Simple. Similar story with the landing page. So looks like there really isn't a landing page. Looks like members is landing page. So this is sort of the landing page is the login page. So unless you're logged in, if you are logged in, it'll send you to the members page. If not, it's probably you probably need to sign up. And finally, this is where our isAuthenticated JavaScript file comes into play. Remember, we're using the express session in order to detect whether or not this user is still logged in or not. So we need to ensure that if the user is authenticated, then we can go ahead and send this HTML file for the members. And the way that looks like from a login, I know with the screen captures you can't quite see a preview of these, so we're just going to take a look at some of the JavaScript files, right? So of course, we understand, the document.ready declarations for the jQuery. So these are the forms that are being inputted, and then once it's submitted, then we go ahead and declare a variable. Of course, we get to the event prevent default on any sort of on a submit inside of a document. So we'll go ahead and take the input, add it, and as well as the password. And it's basically saying that if either the user data, if either the email is empty or if the password is empty, then it's going to tell you to return, right? Otherwise, so this is a nice little check. Of course, if both of these are populated, then what's going to happen is we're going to go ahead and log in the user. We run login user, which is from, and which should go ahead and, okay. So what all this is going to do is, just clear out the form itself. And here's the login user function. So, okay. So this function, login user, so we went ahead and taken in the data that's been populated in fields, and now we're going to use a post command to send the email and the password data to the login request, API login, and then it should, okay, Then it's going to tell you to go to members, and because we saw in the HTML routes at the bottom is authenticated needs to be true, then we'll go ahead and get the members HTML. Otherwise, we're going to have a redirect back to the login, from what it seems. So let's look at the sign up. Okay, so sign up very similar to login.js. We have a couple of jQuery that's selecting the user input forms, and again we're loading the inputs into a variable, and we have the same check on there. And then instead of login user, we have a sign up user function. So the sign up user function is, okay, we're posting this to the sign up API, which then gets resolved and which then gets processed in our user model and then sent to our database, right? So that should more or less cover those for member.js. Okay, cool. So this is more or less handling what we want to see on the members page. It looks like all we're doing is we're just getting the user data, and then we're gonna go ahead and display it on the page itself to say, hey, you're the user that's logged in. So nothing too fancy. Of course, we'll be doing something a little more elaborate than that in future projects, hopefully, or at work. So hopefully I've covered everything that needed to be covered under the develop folder. I do apologize if I did get off topic a couple of times, and I hope you enjoyed the show. Thank you.